Hi, and welcome back to Becca Babbles podcast. I'm your host, Becca. I'm a certified personal trainer, holistic health coach, and future chiropractor on my way to figuring out this thing we called life. Now, let's get babbling. Hi, everyone, and welcome back to Becca Babbles podcast. And I have finally finished try 7 of chiropractic school. I'm so excited. It is my official last trimester of the academic side. So if you don't know how like Parker University is set up, my chiropractic school, you basically have one side of the street where it's all your academic classes, things like biochem, gross anatomy, diff die, things like that is on one side of the street, which you call the academic side. And then on the other side of the street, you have then the non-academic side or clinic, basically, where you are becoming more like a chiropractor and you are treating patients and doing all the things. You still have some classes depending on if you took a master's or not, but you are mostly just doing clinic work. So I have finished the academic side and I'm going across the street. So I am excited to officially actually start treating patients. If you are in the DFW area and would like to get treated by me, and you are willing to go to the Parker Clinic around like mid-September, I'll be accepting clients or patients to go in there and helping treating people and getting them better, moving better, feeling better. I'm so pumped. I It's like when I started this trimester, you're just like, I'm just trying to get through this. And then it hits like midterms, or I start talking to my friends who were graduating this year. I had a ton of friends graduate this tri, which is really sad. But I had this realization where I'm like, wait, I'm almost done. I have a year left. And it's kind of nerve-wracking. I'll go a little bit more into how I was feeling during out this entire trimester, because if you don't already know, I'm very much of a planner. I like to think ahead or think of the future. I'm getting better about not getting overwhelmed about that. But that will be in the part 2 of this podcast series. If you don't already know, each trimester, starting from the pre-DC program, I've been doing podcasts about each step along the way going through chiropractic school. So if you are currently in any of the lower tries, or honestly, if you're any of the upper tries and want to have nostalgia or feel like you resonate with any of the things that I was experiencing, go back and listen to any of those episodes. I have a full-on playlist of each episode, basically called like chiropractic school. It's on my Instagram in a link tree, and you can just listen to that full on playlist from pre-DC all the way up till now try 7. Most of the podcasts have a part 1 where it's a class by class breakdown with tips along the way of like how to get the most benefit out of the class, so you kind of understand what you're getting yourself into. And then part 2 is more of like reflections of that trimester for myself. And then I answer any questions that you guys have submitted as far as like boards, clinic, mental health, studying, stuff like that. So let's get right into try 7. Try 7, if you are taking the classic route, you will have 9 classes this trimester. The first one we're going to go into is patient management. So in patient management, and I've sadly heard that patient management, the professor will be changing, so things may look a little bit different than what I'm talking about, but the main foundations of the class will probably still be the same. But my professor was Dr. Marianne DMAC, or SheMac, depending on how you identify her as. The class setup was basically 2 hours of an in-person lecture and 2 hours of lab. The in-person lecture, sometimes it depended on what we were going over, if it was 2 hours or not. Sometimes it would just be an hour, sometimes it would be 2 hours. But the first half of it looked like she would have a general idea of what area of the body we'd be looking over. So either it was like the cervical spine, thoracic spine, lumbar spine, or a low back case, extremity case where whether it's upper or lower, and she would go through a case that maybe someone had given her, and then the second half of it, she would go through how she personally would treat the condition. And then, DMAC, she will always go down all her different rabbit holes. And sometimes we would start talking about like a particular case. And then we would go down a totally different conversation, but each conversation was so valuable, and had little tips and tricks along the way, or just more of an inside look on what it looks like to treat as a chiropractor, which I really appreciated her openness and honesty throughout all of her conversations. We did have some like oddball lectures where it was like, what is it like being an associate, or how do you set yourself up to be a good associate, or sometimes when we get out of chiropractic school we don't really know what's a good job offer and what's not, so she kind of highlighted some of that. She also talked about what it would be like starting your own business and if you should start your own business, and she is very much like a yes woman. So like if you are like, I'm debating back and forth, she would definitely encourage you to like go in head first and start your own thing, which I appreciate. And if that's something where you just feel like you need a little bit more of a boost, she's definitely the type of person to go to for that. But that was pretty much most of what lecture was about. It wasn't anything particularly hard, and I think this is something you're going to realize throughout this entire podcast about Try 7 is some people will call it like the babysitting try or the try where you basically just review everything and you're kind of like floating in space being like, what am I doing here, but I still need to be here for classes. A lot of this is review, or not necessarily review, but basically taking your neuro classes and your ortho classes and your adjusting classes and basically combining it into one and seeing how you can take all these individual subjects that you've learned and combining it into one. And patient management is one of those classes that are very much highlighted of, you better know all of your stuff because it's all going to be combined. And you'll see this in lab, especially because what will happen is she will give you a case, he or she, depending on who the professor is coming into patient management, they'll probably give you a case where you have to read it over, and you will then have this template of what the practical will look like, and you will have to fill out how you would treat this patient. So to give you an idea of what that template looks like, there's 3 sections to it. The first section is the diagnosis. So basically you're reading through the case and it talks about the patient's presentation. Almost think back to like DIFDI. If you were about to go into that practical, it was like, okay, what does this person have? What is their diagnosis? And then you would have to write down reasons for why you think they have this certain diagnosis. And then I think it was like 4 or 5 different reasons in the exam specifically. So things like range of motion, painful movements, what else? Things like that that would hint you into why your diagnosis is correct. So that would be the first section, the first page. Then the second page, or the second section would be areas to direct treatment. And this is the one where people get really confused on what they're supposed to write and what they're supposed to put in. To give you a simple understanding of how this works, it's literally just your broad general overview. So if you think back maybe to like try 2, try 3, where you made like all your T tree maps, where it's like, this is the main general idea here at the top. And then you had your subsections down there, and then you subsection below that. Your general, or your areas to direct treatment would be like that first part. So like the top of the T tree map would be, let's say, cervical radiculopathy, or your patient's name, because we always know n equals 1. Each patient is different, even though they have the same diagnosis, yada, yada, yada. So patient's name and all the things that you found. And then that next part of that T tree chart would be areas to direct treatment. So this is the broad overview of what you would treat. So in here, you'd put in things like you're going to work on cervical range of motion, maybe because when you were measuring with the inclinometers, they were decreased. Or maybe you're going to work on cervical flexion desensitization because they had pain with flexion. Or maybe you're going to work on soft tissue or myofascial release in the shoulder complex because they had trigger points in that area. So it's just a broad overview of what you will be doing. It's not necessarily saying, I am going to do ART on their traps. That's not what you're doing in this section. You're just saying general ideas. And then you'll have to write like a justification why. So going back to the cervical range of motion, you could say, I'm going to be working on cervical range of motion. That's in one box. And then for your justification, you would say, because they had decreased cervical range of motion, you could probably put the degrees in there too. Literally that simple. Don't overcomplicate it. Also in that section, she'll give you, well, this is more for the practical, but on the practical, when you get that second section, you'll also get more information about your patient so you can change your diagnosis if you want to. Typically what I'd find is I didn't end up changing my diagnosis. It would just give me more information on things that I could direct my treatment with, or just treatment options in general. Which, speaking of that, that is the third section. So the third section is treatment options that you want to do, and you have to be specific about this. So going back to that T chart thing, I wish I had like a representation of like a little T chart you could go through, but hopefully you're imagining this. The last part of that T chart would basically be specifically, what are you doing? So examples of this would be, I am adjusting M to L for at C7. Your reasoning would be because they have an RP C7 restriction. Simple as that. I am going to work on 90-90 supine breathing because put that in there, and then justification because chest dominance breathing pattern. Boom, easy. I will say you will have to have a soft tissue intervention, a adjusting intervention, and a rehab intervention. And typically you would have to have two. It's not that hard. It's super simple. Don't overcomplicate it. I think the only reason why people get overwhelmed is because they don't know specifically what words to use, because it's a fill in the blank process. It's not a multiple choice, and you get in your head thinking, what are they wanting? And that's not what they're looking for. They're literally just looking for, does what you're doing make sense, and does it relate back to the case? The only reason you would get points taken off is if you got the diagnosis wrong, which, like, if your diagnosis was wrong, it wasn't really even that many points if it was like a relatable diff die. You would get points taken off if, let's say, you put, I will adjust C2, and they didn't have a C2 restriction. So just read the case and plug and play. It's not that complicated. Just don't get overwhelmed by it. And that's why they would have us fill out these, read a case before lab, fill this out, because then once we got to the practical, we were so comfortable with the way that the practical was set up with the forms, that once we walked into the practical, it was super easy peasy. So we would talk about the case, and we would be in like 3 to 4 different groups with different docs, and we would talk about the case. The docs may go into exactly how they would have treated it, but they also just make sure that you're understanding how the practical works and sets up. So that would be the first half of lab. Then the second half of lab is we would have like 3 to 4 stations, and depending on what we went over in lecture that week, the case would probably equal up to what we went over that week in lecture. but we would have different interventions. So like, for example, one week we talked about a low back case or a hot low back, which is really common where students are like, I want to know what to do because if I have a patient come in and they literally cannot get on the table, I don't know what I'm going to do. How am I supposed to examine them? So that was a topic that we talked about a lot. And then we went into lab and talked about. So you will have a couple different stations. One would be like a soft tissue intervention, a rehab intervention, an adjusting intervention. And then you'll have Dr. Moore with his like 5 million studies being like, this study recommends this type of treatment. And he would just list off all the things and all the knowledge because he is a book of knowledge. It was actually kind of funny. We finally figured out, if any of you guys know who Dr. Moore is, which most of you probably do if you're at Parker. Dr. Moore, we found out something he didn't know about. And if you're in the like R2P space or enjoy DNS, he does not know any of the DNS exercises. Dr. DMAC was telling us how a bunch of us wrote 3-month supine or 3-month prone for different exercises. And Dr. Moore was like, what is this? Because a lot of people think that the head professor of this class is the one grading all the practicals, but it's a team effort. And so Dr. Moore would be grading some of the practicals and he would go to DMAC and be like, what is happening here? What is this? So we finally got him on something he doesn't know. I feel like this is something we should celebrate because we all know no one can be perfect. And Dr. Moore is included into that, even with all of his knowledge still. So that's pretty much the setup of patient management. Again, it may look a little bit different going into this class if you're going into it right after me, just because there will be a different professor. But for the most part, I think it's going to stay generally the same. We did have some days where we would do Kahoots and we would like read a case almost like as if it was in DIFDI and you would have to answer that. And then sometimes there will be questions of like, what intervention would you do if you had blah, 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 and then do that. So we brought back the competitiveness of try 1 and try 2 where you had the 5 million Kahoots. But I think the most exciting thing of this class is you have 3 to 4 practicals and only 2 written exams and no final. So the reason why you have no final is because you'll have one practical for like the midterm, and then you'll have another practical, which is just your second practical. And then 3-4 is one full on practical, but it's the same case. So at the beginning of the week on Tuesday, you'll take your practical and it'll be the same setup as practicals 1 and 2, the 3 sections that I just explained. Then on Thursday, you'll come back, have the same case, but basically the person comes back and you get to see how your interventions either improved your patient or made your patient stay the same or regress. And then basically you have to say what two exams or audits are you going to do to see if the patient improved or not. And then now that you did those 2 audits, what are your interventions moving forward? Are you going to keep them the same? Why? Are you going to change them and why? Pretty simple, not too complicated. The written exams, it's a little bit more difficult because there is a right answer to where the practical, it's like choose your own adventure, where the written exam is like, no, there is a right answer to this. And it's the same exact setup as the practical, but just in multiple choice. You will have some studies, and please, 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 please read the studies because there will be like 3 or 4 questions on the test about these studies. And you will have to know what it's saying in the study to then answer the question. For us, a lot of it had to do with like how long the treatment time was based off what that study recommended, or different definitions, things like yellow flags and stuff like that. But for the most part, if you read the study, you'll be fine. Some other tips I'll give for this class is just basically knowing your orthos, because if you don't know your orthos, then if you read the exam and you're like, I don't know what Hodgkin's Kennedy is. And you're like, oh, shoot. Now I don't know how to answer this question because this is the only ortho that's positive. Then things might be a little bit difficult when it comes to diagnosing your patient. The other thing that I'd recommend is just learning the system of how the practical is set up. So take the time to read the case, even though it's not for a grade. They did it for like a participation grade, but don't just read the case, take the extra mile and like actually fill out the practical forms with the case, because then it'll just make it that much easier going into the practical to where you're like, what do I put? And then lastly, I just say enjoy the class and just like take personal notes and tips during lecture. Again, I don't know who the professor is going to be for this class, but any professor has been a chiro in the field before. They have some tips that we don't know or we haven't experienced from. So anything will be knowledgeable for us moving forward that you can then refer back to. I know it's fun to like soak up the information in that moment. And you're like, yeah, let's go. We're going to be amazing chiros and like get all heated up and stuff like that. But in those times where, and I'm just projecting this in the future, but like in those times where like business gets hard, things get rough, you don't know if you're a good chiro or not, referring back to those personal tips or those things that that professor had said in that class will probably be beneficial. So that's patient management. The next class that I'm going to talk about is a lot different than patient management. This is going to be your radiographic examinations, or RAD for short. This was with Dr. Zanger, but there is multiple lab professors for this class. He was just the head guy. I think he was the one that did our online lectures. I'm not really sure. I didn't really watch them after the third week of school, because if you do watch them, you'll find that they're just reviewing the setups with the actual exam pictures that you did in lab that day before. Our labs were typically on Monday, and then by the time I got to the lecture, it was probably like Tuesday or Wednesday. So I was like, I don't want to watch this again. But I did have a friend who she said that it helped her review. For me, I didn't find it very helpful. So it just kind of depends on who you are. For lab, you'll have 2 hours in lab where basically they'll just go through different setups. You'll start with the cervical spine and then go all the way down the spine. And then you'll go to extremities later on. It's funny, my lab instructor was like, I don't know why they give us 2 hours when you would go over probably maybe 5 or 6 films at the most. Sometimes it was just 3 or images. And he's like, it only takes like 30 minutes to an hour for this class. But if you still want to take the time to practice the other setups and use that time to review, he has to stay there. So might as well take that time if you can. The best way to explain this class is basically all those images that you learned in clinical imaging. Now you're learning how to set them up. And then there's like a little bit of FDI that comes back where you have to know like focal film distance and like the anode versus cathode. But for the actual setup for lab and for the practicals, you'll have to know like where you put the like where you put the bucky, where you put the image and all those things. So like focal film distance, central ray, patient position, cassette size, tube tilt, shielding, and patient's breathing instructions, because they're all going to be different based off what region of the spine you're going to be in or extremity. It's not difficult. The only thing you have to make sure is that you actually review. So this will probably be one of the only classes where I would recommend you making flashcards or making like a spreadsheet of the setups and practicing it each week. So for me, what I did was we would have that 2-hour lab, and it would probably only take us like 30 minutes to an hour to go through all the new setups. We would go through all the new setups, and then after that, I would stay for another like 30 minutes to an hour reviewing all of the setups that we learned last week or the setups that I know that I have difficulty with and practicing with that and using that as review time, because it's like, what are you going to do for the next hour, especially if you have another class afterwards, which is what I had. So like, use your time wisely. The class gives you 2 practicals and 2 written exams. The first practical is basically any region of the spine or ribs. You'll have 4 different views that you'll have to do all the different setups in. I don't remember the time exactly. I think you get 8 minutes to do all of that and like set the person up. It's not that bad unless you get like multiple oblique views and you're like, wait, hold on, I have to calculate. Like, I'm imaging that picture of that meme of that lady where she's like super focused and she's doing all the different calculations. That's me anytime I'm like having to set up for an oblique view, especially for like cervical or lumbar or ribs, because you do they'll teach you the clap thing again, which I never got in clinical imaging. She said it and I was like, I don't understand what you're talking about. But then they'll go over it again in um in rad and I was like, oh, this makes sense. So I think because I'm such a hands-on person, if I had rad going into clinical imaging, maybe more things would make sense in my brain, because I was like, oh, this makes sense because the person has to be set up this way. But it is what it is. I got through that class and that's all that matters. So that's the first practical. The second practical is a little bit different. The second practical, you'll only do like a series, and most likely it's going to be an extremity because that's the second half of what we had learned after the midterm. And then because some series only had 2 images, some you'll have like one random view from like any time. So I think what I had was what did I have? I think I had the foot series, and then I had like a chest view. So that's kind of the setup of the second practical. But if like your series only had 2 images, so like the clavicle only has 2 images for that one, then you would probably have something like a chest and a lumbar that you would have to do. So it all just depends on what card you draw. So draw a good card is all I can say. And then the written exams for this class are pretty much like the practical, just in written form and multiple choice. You will have some questions like, this patient has bubbly sclerotic bone at the epiphysis in the tibia. Then you'd have to like guess what that is, or you'll have like a scoliosis question, or you'll have a physics question from like FDI, but most of the time it's just talking about like the anode and the cathode, or like how much of the particles actually absorb into the X-ray versus how many is um like lost through heat, stuff like that. He'll give you I say review, but it's more like, you will have this many questions on like imaging and this many questions on scoliosis and this many questions on cancer and this many questions on physics. And typically the physics questions were only like 5 questions. Most of the time he would just say, just read they give you a lab manual, which is really helpful, where it explains all the different setups with pictures, not of the setups, but like of the picture of the image that it would create. Sometimes it would give you pictures of the actual setup, which is helpful for me. And that beginning part of that lab manual will go through all of the physics things that you would need to know to then answer the questions in lab. So not hard. It's just like actually putting effort into that. You will have quizzes probably like every other week going over the actual setups. Typically what will happen is like that first page is images of the actual X-ray, not the setup, but like the picture you would be taking, and you would have to name that image view. And then the back of the page will be just like a bunch of random questions of like, what is the central ray? What is the tube tilt of blah, 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 blah. And then you'll have like bonus questions that typically are related to either spondies or cancer, stuff like that, to make sure that you keep up with the information from clinical imaging to get you ready for part 2 and part 3 boards, which I will be taking soon, which is something I'll probably talk about in my next podcast, so stay tuned. All right, and then the last thing from this class is you'll have a project that you'll do, super easy, simple. It's stretched out through 3 weeks. You'll get like a patient and they'll state all the things that happened to them. You'll have to do a report on that patient. And then what was the second part? There's like a second part that you had to do. Oh, no. The first part was you had to fill out the form that you would write in clinic if you were I wanted to say intern. Student intern, yeah, at the Barker Clinic. So like the form you would write out to then request for an x-ray for a patient that came in for you in like try 9. So they're getting you used to that sort of setup. And then the next week would be writing an actual like image report, case report of the image, the stuff that you did in like try 2 and try 3. And then the last part is basically you have to create a video of you talking to someone and saying, this is what is on your image, and basically talk about it in a way that they would understand. For me, I had to call my dad McFlurry because that was our patient's name. And I swear it was harder for me to start the video calling my dad McFlurry than it was to actually record the video. So if you are recording this video with someone within your family or a friend, make sure they can actually keep a straight face or you can actually talk to them. Because I think it took me 10 minutes to just get started and call him McFlurry without laughing than it did actually me recording the thing. So take that as you may. Now, the next class is going to be geriatrics. Geriatrics is with Dr. McClendon. The class setup is basically online lectures, and that's pretty much it. There's no lab or anything. You will have 3 exams, and please do not underestimate this class. A lot of people are like, oh, it's just old people. That's fine. No. There are some questions where you're like, okay, this makes sense, or it's kind of review from other classes. But then there's some questions where you're like, okay, I'm going to have to think about this one. And so for me, what I did with this class is I downloaded the PowerPoints, not the PDFs, the PowerPoints. And each week I didn't watch the lecture videos, but I went through the actual PowerPoints and read them myself and then read the notes at the bottom part of the PowerPoint. So like, you know how the speaker can write notes at the bottom? She would write notes at the bottom. And a lot of the times those notes would then turn into questions. So for me, what I did is I copied and pasted all of the objectives and I would read the PowerPoints, answer the objectives, and then anything that was in the bottom of the speaker notes, if I thought that I could then make a question from that, I would then in my like Notion page make a little toggle feature so I wouldn't see the answer, and I would put the answer to that question and I'd write that question. And she does typically like send out a review sheet or a review exam where she's like, practice these questions. The first exam that she gave that had like practice questions on it, it was kind of helpful, but not really. A little bit. The final exam where she gave a practice exam, that was really helpful. So the review sheets are really helpful. And what I would find is that a lot of the objectives that I would answer were basically what was on the review sheet anyways. So then I could just like copy and paste that over and then I could read over that review sheet. So that's what helped me in that class. And I did decently well in that class. But if you don't do anything for that class and then walk in the day before and like think that you can just read through all of the PowerPoints, I'm not a personally fast reader, and also I'm not one of those people who can like the day of just read stuff and boom, perform. I get too anxious with that. But even if you are, I would recommend at least like the night before or the week before reading through the PowerPoints, because at the beginning it's a lot of information. As you like go through the trimester, the information kind of dies down. So take that as you will. For me, I would typically do this class before, like in the morning on Monday, or I do it Sunday. I would just like read through the PowerPoints, answer the objectives, and then you would have like 2 quizzes that they would only be open on Monday, so I couldn't like get ahead and like do them on Sunday. But on Monday, then I would like take the quiz, which honestly was probably a good thing because then I would get repetition with the information. But sometimes I'm like, I just want to get the work done. So you can only do so much. But if you don't have a class till 10 a.m. and you're a morning person like me, I highly recommend scheduling or blocking out time for this class before your 10 a.m. class, just to get it done and over with, because she typically opens them up pretty early. All right, the next class is emergency care or e-care. This class is so fun. This is with Dr. Hart and Dr. Oz. Dr. Oz is like such a little fireball. It's so funny and cute. This class setup is basically where it's an online lecture and then you have 2 hours of lab. Now, you can do this class one of 2 ways. You can take it as like, this is just a fun, chill class and like whatever, or you can try and get as much as you can out of this class. I, at the beginning, tried to get as much as I could out of this class because I personally, if any sort of like emergency situation happened, I want to be ready for it. I want to be like prepared for it, or like be helpful in a situation. I will say there is a lot of videos at the beginning, dies down towards the end, or like towards the end, it's kind of just common sense. And it's like, do I really need to watch these videos? I watched the videos till like week 12, and then just didn't want to watch the videos anymore. And I also just didn't find them very helpful because, again, like I said, it was either stuff I already knew, or it was like common sense stuff. So that's how I kind of set up my time for that class. But the lab, I highly recommend paying attention in lab, but also just having like a fun time in lab. You learn a ton of different skills that you wouldn't learn anywhere else. I know for me, I had the opportunity in high school. I did the CNA program at my high school, but I also could have done the EMS program. I didn't end up doing it because I think it was because of COVID. They shut that down. And so I only could do CNA, but I had already planned on doing the CNA program anyways. Looking back, if I had the opportunity, it would be really cool to do the EMS stuff, but I didn't do that. And there was probably a reason for that. So I got that experience kind of in this class, where you get to learn how to bandage a patient, you get to learn how to deal with fractures, even a clavicle fracture, you learn how to deal with an eye injury. I have a really funny picture of my friend with like a cup on her eye, and then she's like wrapped around with a bandage around her head. It's really funny. And then you also get to learn how to spine board. I was actually the spine board patient as we were practicing in class. And when I tell you, you have to give all these people your trust, you have to. Because it's like, I was just laying dead on the board. Or actually, I was on the floor. And then people were just like rolling me onto the board. And there's like so many hands touching you everywhere. And you're like, I don't know who is touching me, but I can't move because technically, if I was a patient like this, I would not move at all, or I wouldn't supposed to be, especially depending on what injury I had. And then they have to like strap all these straps on you and stuff like that. And then they have to lift you up like 3 feet in the air. And you're like, oh, now these people are carrying me. Like I have to trust them. And you have like a C collar on and all the things. So it's a fun time being in that class and knowing how to deal with incidences in real life that sometimes I think we forget happen on a day-to-day basis because we are so absorbed in our studies and our day-to-day lives and our phones that we forget that these are actual things that people deal with on a daily basis. I also realized that I really need to put a blanket in my car in case an emergency situation happens and I have to drag a patient somewhere. And then B, that I need to put way more things in my hiking bag than I have. Because if me or my friend got impaled by a stick if we fell, I wouldn't have anything. So I need to put more of that stuff in my bag, which is what I'm planning on doing. Another thing that they made really fun for this class was for our final practical. Dr. Oz, she's so sweet. She's such a crafty human being. She created a D&D inspired game. I'm not a D&D player, but this was still really fun. She made a D&D inspired game that was like a zombie invasion to help us practice for the final practical. And if you don't already know, the final practical is basically where there is some sort of invasion. Ours was a Jurassic Park invasion. She said she was going to dress up as a dinosaur, but then she didn't know how people would react and stuff. But basically, you'll have patients on the ground. Some will have different sorts of injuries. One patient will be a spine board patient that you will have to set up and work as a team together for that. Honestly, if you just try your best in this practical, you'll come out with 100. So don't be worried about the grade with the final practical. She just wants you to see how you'll react in these kinds of situations, which I really appreciate. And as long as you keep moving forward and trying to work as a team and you don't curse out any of the patients, you'll be fine. So enjoy the process, have fun. And if you guys are currently in Tri 6 going into Tri 7, I'm hoping I can be one of your guys' patients, and it's going to be so fun because if I end up being one of the patients that had an overdose, you guys are going to have some fun with me. All right. And then for the class exam wise, you'll have 3 exams that you'll have to take for this class, written exams. Basically just read through the lab manual that she gives you. It's a super cute lab manual that she like made on Canva with all these like different pictures and stuff like that. It's basically like an elementary school book. So it's really easy to read. It's not like any of the lab manuals that you'll get in like rad or ortho, unless you had ortho with Dr. Cummings, then like maybe you'll know what it looks like. And then if you just read the objectives through that week, I did the same thing that I did with geriatrics. I would listen to the lecture. I would actually listen to the lectures for this one, but then I would just answer the objective questions and then put below any questions that I thought she may or may not ask. So definitely know things about shock when you get to that exam, and definitely know different like tags or coding. So like if you had a medical emergency, if someone was tagged with like a yellow versus a red versus a black, like know what all those different listing things are. And then we would typically have a lot of information on what type of breathing apparatus someone would have to use depending on what kind of injury they had. So those are the kind of questions that I found that popped up pretty frequently. But for the most part, just follow what the objectives are, the lab manual, and you should be fine. I'm pretty sure she sent out a review of like, these are the kinds of questions, but I would overhear people talking about it, but I never actually paid attention to it. Maybe if I did, I would have gotten better grades on the exam, but like, it is what it is. All right. The next class is clinic readiness with Dr. King. She's super sweet. And when I said this class is a review, or this try is a review, this class is literally the class where it is a review. Each 1 hour in-person lecture that you had for this class was a review of whatever topic you learned throughout the entire schooling. It was most of the time, the reason why I came to this class was because we would have patient management right afterwards, but also just to like stay up to date with like what's going on and to know what the 3 different practicals were like, or if she would to talk about the 3 different practicals, or if there was maybe like a subject that I wasn't really good with. Like she went over cranial nerves one day. And it's been a hot minute since I've done that. So I was like, okay, I need to sit in this and actually like pay attention. And then it also allowed me not to have to um watch the well, she didn't do any online videos. It was just the recording. Sometimes there was like online videos with questions that you had to answer based off the like PowerPoint that she gave out, but it was usually because we didn't have an in-person lecture. So it just made it easier to listen to that and then like answer the questions on the quiz. So if there was anything in that class where I was like, I already know about lumbar, like inclinometry and soft tissue and all the things, especially because we had lab the day before and we literally went over all that stuff. It's like, I'll just do my quizzes during this time and like be in that focus mode. I think the hardest thing in Try 7 is keeping that focus mode on and that like momentum going. And because I was there surrounded by my friends during that time, and this is coming from a person who like in Try 2, Try 3, I was like, this is when I do this and that and this and that. I was like, man, it's really hard to like keep it going. So this was that class that kind of like got me into gear in the morning um to like start doing quizzes and stuff like that, and then I could fully pay attention in patient management. And then you'll also have 2 written exams for this class. It is super easy. Literally, like if you want to review the slides right before, um maybe not right before because typically this class was at like 9 a.m. and I would go for like a walk in the morning or go to the gym. So depending on the kind of person that you are, but maybe the night before, read through the slides and it will literally be verbatim those answers on the slides. The exam is like a cakewalk. Just don't get mixed up with the wording. Sometimes she likes to trick you. She has to make the exam hard a little bit. So like don't get tripped up with the wording. And then also for our final, I didn't read this very well, but she gave us macas, but she had said at the very top it was like some of the macas only have one answer. And I was like, what? So don't do what I do basically. Honestly, I think the hardest thing in this class is the practicals. The first practical is super easy. You basically just take a history like you did in DiffDi, but then you'll also have review of systems. So this is things like you have to ask about their lifestyle, like how many cups of alcohol do you drink a day? Do you have any medical history I need to be aware of? What is your like activity and lifestyle and movement look like? Stuff like that. That's the first exam or first practical. Super easy, especially coming right off of DiffDi. So if you did really well in DiffDi, like this is basically a review and a cakewalk. Totally good. Just a little bit sprinkled added on top. And then what's really nice is then in communications, a week later, you have a history practical where you have to make it more communicative. Um, duh, because it's communications. But you'll have to then take a history practical again, and you're like, well, I don't need to study for this because I was literally studying for this for clinic readiness, so it works out perfectly. The second practical for clinic readiness is going to be a little bit more intensive. So it's half of an exam flow. And what she's getting you ready to do is for your IMAs that you'll have to do in Try 8 and Try 9. For your exam flow, you'll get, I think it was only 2 of these different things and then 1 ortho. So you'll either get a like cervical or lumbar inclinometry or vitals, upper or lower soft tissue work, an ortho, and then an upper or a neuro or a lower neuro. So like for example, you could get vitals and then you could get lower neuros and then an ortho. And you basically just had to do that, talk to the patient, and then fill out a form of your findings, and then you're done. I don't remember the exact amount of time you get for that. It is less than the second practical or the third practical, but it's getting you ready for that third practical, because the third practical is basically you have 30 minutes to do all of that, not just the two things, but literally you'd get either a neck exam or a back exam. So you would, if you got the neck exam, you would have to do vitals, then upper neuros, then cervical inclinometry and upper soft tissue, and then you'd get an ortho. And you really, 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 really have to explain to the patient what is going on. You have to communicate with the patient, like, I am going to be putting my hands here. Inclinometry, or I'm going to test your range of motion and place these inclinometers, which help me see how much your body is moving. So you have to put it in patient's terms. So pay attention in lab and practice with intent in lab, because then it will just make these practicals easier. And I don't think I ever studied for these practicals outside of class, because I did it in class, and I kind of already knew how to do the orthos and the neuros and the soft tissue from doing it in other classes. Plus also in FSA 3, you kind of you practice this too. So you're getting repetition throughout other classes. So then thankfully you don't have to do it outside of school, which is really nice. But yeah. All right, the next class is communications. This is with Dr. Hamilton. Not gonna lie, I was a little bit disappointed in this class. I believe that communication is really, really important, especially as a chiropractor. We do not get enough time with soft skills. If you don't know what that is, that's basically like leadership, communication, things like that. Hard skills are like the actual things as a chiropractor that you do. We do not get enough time with communication. And my idea of this class was basically I was going to go in and I was either going to have to stand in front of the class and talk about a certain subject, or have to make a PowerPoint presentation and talk about a certain subject. Kind of like if you were in SheMac's patient, no, multimodal elective, where she basically had you create a presentation and either pretend like you're talking to an OB or just regular everyday patients, and you were talking about why chiropractic was important, stuff like that. That's what I was expecting going into this class. Or if I was going into an interview, what that was like. I know a lot of people don't like standing up in front of the class and talking, but we have to get uncomfortable and used to that, because either you get uncomfortable now in front of your classmates, or you get uncomfortable in front of a patient or in front of a giant group of people, or I don't know, at some seminar presentation. And for me, I would rather get my awful reps in front of my classmates instead of in front of a patient or in front of a group of people that I have to give a talk on, because I'm trying to make money as a chiro, or because I'm trying to actually help people, but I am stammering over my words because I am so nervous talking in front of someone, and I don't want them to judge me or something because I'm a new chiro, stuff like that. So I was really hoping to get more out of this class. You did have 2 times where you stood up in front of a class and talked. So the first day, I think we stood up in front of the class and said you had to explain, why does someone need to come and see you specifically as a chiro? So if you were in a grocery store basically saying, "Hi, my name is Becca. I am a chiro at the Parker Clinics. I would love to help you with your neck pain," or I help treating patients who are dealing with certain pain and are dealing with some sort of active issue, um, or getting back into physical activity, stuff like that. That was kind of what the first question was. And then the second day, or the second class, we had a question that I couldn't remember, but the second question was basically she went around the classroom and you had to pick an object, which I actually really appreciated this, because this took me back to when I did improv in my theater class. But basically you had to pick an object. So if I got a water bottle, I actually did get a water bottle, a plastic water bottle, and I had to somehow then relate the water bottle to chiropractic. And most of you are probably thinking, oh, she just crumpled up the water bottle and said, like, it's the crack of chiropractic as you get the adjustment. And I knew that was immediately what everyone would say. So I was like, no, I'm going to relate it to something else because I wanted to make it harder on myself. I don't remember what I ended up saying, though. I think I said something about, like, filling up your cup, maybe? I don't remember. But that's kind of the last thing that you did standing up in front of the class. The rest were basically, like, assignments that you had to do. There was this one assignment we had to do where it was 15 documents. Maybe that's over exaggerating, but it was a lot of documents. Probably like 7 that you had to download. And I was like, this is going to take up so much storage on my iPad. And you had to go through and like answer the questions and be like, okay, which of these like weren't signed by a doc, or which of these um it was like, did the patient's weight change? So it was like really monotonous. And I was like, what does this have to do with communications? So if you know how that correlates to communications, just let me know. Again, I think the reason why I was so disappointed in this class was because I had a different idea of what communications was. The other things that we did in this class was basically you would, to practice for your history practical in this class, you would get in like a group of 3. One person would be the patient, one person would be grading you on a rubric, and one person was the doc, and you had to go through a history and talk to this patient. And then another thing was you had to go through a ROF, um, and this was like your informed consent and like what you would do with a patient and stuff like that. And the patient would either be like the super angry patient, or someone who was more sensitive, or someone who didn't believe in chiropractic care or something like that. So approaching different conversations. So depending on the type of person that you have. So like for me, I had one of my friends who likes to mess with me. So when we got the document where it was like, you are a combative patient, he like went for it. So it can be fun. It is what you make of it. But again, it wasn't what I had expected when it came to communication. So just to give you the heads up, if you thought it was going to be something else, if you're afraid to stand up in front of class, you are forewarned. You only have to do it twice, unless they change it. So, you do get to do a VR session with like a patient. It's a suicide prevention patient. So basically, it was more of like a therapy session setup, but this is the only like VR thing that they had where it was like healthcare related. So you are able to, if this is something that's really triggering to you, you are able to like not do it. But they just wanted you to like, if this was something to happen, like how you would calm down the patient, or how you would deal with that sort of situation. So there are online videos for this class. I didn't personally find them helpful, but maybe you will. So um, that's basically most of what this class entails. I kind of already talked about the first practical. Basically, you just did it with clinic readiness. You take a history, you just have to communicate a little bit more and make it flow a little bit more like a conversation. She will count off for you saying, uh, so just make sure it flows really well. And I would get points counted off because I'm moving my hands around. I actually, during the practical, I held my hands together like this. If you're watching the video form of this, I held my hands together like this. And my comment from her was, next time, let's try to put our hands down and not like hold your hands very aggressive. And I had said, well, you either get this where I'm holding my hands together, or you get this where my hands are going around like crazy. And she's like, okay, well, maybe instead we go from this to then this. And I was like, okay, fair. So I don't know. I also feel like me talking with my hands just, yeah, I don't know. It helps my body get my blood flowing, but maybe that's just me trying to like get my grade up, but whatever. Then the second practical was where you do an ROF. This is basically where you get to pick a patient's diagnosis. So for me, I picked TOS, or thoracic outlet syndrome. You basically have to explain to a patient in normal words what exactly this diagnosis means, what it is, and then you have to have an object. So for me, I forgot my object, so I used the like hair clip I had in my hair, and then I took like a keychain and I like opened up the clip, and then I put the keychain in, and then I talked about how then the nerve is being compressed by like um and causing you to have like numbness and tingling in your hand, either due to like either a muscular attachment or like your first rib, stuff like that. And I just like closed it down on the keychain, and that worked. I also had a friend who like had dizziness, and he's like super into the neuro stuff, and he like full on made like a jar filled with water, and then he put marbles in it and he like spun it around. It was really cool. So it's how much you like want to put into your prop. Then what you would have to do is basically explain what you would do, and then what complications to adjustments are, and like what an adjustment is, how often they need to come see you. And this is basically, again, getting you ready for your IMA. So like try 7 is basically just getting you ready for clinic and your IMAs and tests and stuff that you'll have to do for Try 8. So I will let you know if it was helpful after my Try 8 podcast, but you'll have to wait another like 4 months for that one. All right, the next class is documentation. This one was with Dr. Morales. I think this one is also changing, but again, the setup is probably going to be pretty similar to what I experienced, because you can't really change much about documentation because it's a very much this then that sort of class. You had online lectures, and then you had a 2-hour lab that you would go to. And I will say, this lab is very, very boring. This lab is very, very monotonous. But it is important to learn how to document, because if you don't document something, it didn't happen. And then if you don't document something and you get audited, then you're out of practice, or you have to pay a lot of money. And I would like to stay in practice and practice with my patients and help people get better. So it's the part that people don't enjoy as much as being a chiropractor, but it is still really important. The type of documentation that you get in this class is like the way that I was explained to it from a different professor. They were like, you are taught documentation at this level, like a really, really high level. Most chiros do documentation at a really low, low level. And that's the reason why you get taught at a really high, high level. So then they're hoping that maybe when you go out to practice, you're like in the mid range of like, this is pretty decent documentation. So anytime you get frustrated with this class, just remember that you are doing this for your patients, so you get to keep seeing your patients. And there will be different ways to document in the future when you go out and practice, but some of the rules will stay the same. The type of application, or what's the word? Like desktop apparatus. I can't think of the word right now. Whatever it is, the type of software that you use may look different and may be a little bit easier to use than what we use at Parker. So some people say that the way that you are taught in Try 7 is different than when you go to clinic. I can't confirm nor deny because I haven't been in clinic yet. So I will give you that update in my Try 8 podcast, and we'll see what happens. I will say sometimes it was really interesting. You would walk into class, and on the screen, she would just put da 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 got audited, da da da, like is out of practice, and you're like, oh, we are starting with fear in this class. Great. But again, she just wants to stress the importance of like the reason why a lot of different types of clinicians don't take us seriously is because we don't document and we don't show what we do. And so it's important for us to gain respect by playing the game. So if you want to play in the sandbox, you have to figure out how to play in the sandbox. But this class, you'll have like 4 different forms you'll have to figure out how to document on. You'll have a complaint one, which is basically you just taking a history on your patient. And then you'll have a ECN, which will be filled with like family history, lifestyle, medical history, stuff like that. And then you'll have an active treatment plan, which for me, it took me forever to not get this mixed up with the treatment record, like the names of it. I knew when I saw the document what it was, like what I was doing, but the actual name of like, is this one the treatment plan or the treatment record? I don't know why. My brain just was not connecting it. The treatment plan is like the general overview of what you were going to do. So let's say if you had a patient and you want to see them, if you want to do soft tissue for um, one time a week for 2 weeks, and then you want to adjust them 2 times a week for 4 weeks, this would tell you that you are doing soft tissue only for a week and adjusting only for 4 weeks. And then you would have to then like reevaluate and do a whole nother treatment plan. The treatment record, on the other hand, is basically where you have the patient come in, you take their history, you've already done that. Now treatment record is like second visit or third visit. Let's say third visit. So like they've already had their second visit. These are the things that they're telling you are improving right now, whether that be like they're now able to walk a mile without any pain, and they before couldn't walk 5 minutes without pain. Great, perfect, put that in there. Now their cervical range of motion has improved by like 10 degrees. Great, put that in there. And then you'll do your assessment on the patient, or like you'll adjust them, you'll do the rehab, all the stuff. And then you'll say, okay, now the patient is like, has improved their cervical flexion by this much. And so it's like, what's going on in the actual follow-up exams is your treatment record. So if that helps you clear that up before you get into that class, I wish I had someone telling me that and breaking it down a little bit, because for some reason it just was not clicking for me. So those are the how to define all the different documents. But for the actual class, you'll have 2 exams, written exams. That final for us was rough. Not in the sense of like the questions were hard. It was like there were 50 questions and 40 of them were MACA, and she didn't tell you if it was like pick 3, pick 4, or pick 2. Of course, she's not going to tell you to pick 4 because there's only 4 options, but like 40 of the questions were MACA. So like you're brain dead from the trimester and you're like, wait, I have to reread this question 3 times, and then I have to reread the answer questions 3 times because it's a MACA and I'm not sure if it's 3 of these or 2 of these. So put the effort in this class ahead of time to get good grades, so then you don't have to like stress and worry about having to pass this class through the final. Just saying. Now, the first practical for this class, you'll just be doing a treatment record. So you will basically be saying like the patient did this, or you'll get like a treatment plan from the patient. You'll get their complaint. And then you have to see, okay, what do I do with this treatment record? Make sure you read the dates on the treatment plan. So like if it had said you are only doing soft tissue for a week, there is a certain section, and she'll talk about this in lab, where there's a certain section where you say like, okay, I did this on the patient. Don't say you did soft tissue if you can't do soft tissue anymore, because you only did it for 1 week and it's been past that 1 week. So there's a heads up there. And then the second practical, you'll have to fill out all 4 documents. And this practical is really, really important because you have to make a 70 or above on this to pass the class. So even let's say like you have an A in the class, if you don't pass this practical with a 70 or above, you don't get to pass this class. You will be able to do it again, but then if you fail that second one, then you won't be able to go on to clinic. Same thing with that third practical for clinic readiness. So that full exam where it was 30 minutes, you have to get a 70 or above. You can reattempt it, but like just make sure you pass it the first time. And make sure when you submit the document for any of the 4 documents for documentation for that second practical, please make sure the document is actually fully written out or it actually submits, because there was a few people where that happened where they didn't fully submit it and then they had to redo it all over again. You do get the full 4 hours. 4 hours. Pff, that would be crazy. A full 2 hours to fill out all 4 documents. I will say by the time you get that treatment record and you're on that 4th page, your like brain is so dead and you're like, okay, here we go. Once I got that like treatment record, I was like, okay, I gotta breathe and close my eyes for a couple seconds so then I can get going again, because yeah, that was rough. Do pay attention to red flags on that exam. There was quite a few red flag things that you needed to document on that, and some people caught it, some people didn't. So just get ready for an event during that time is all I can say. Some tips I have for this class is basically like you could practice with ChatGPT, basically saying like, hey, give me a case of a patient and like tell me like their history and stuff like that, and you can like ask questions throughout it, so then you can also be documenting at the same time. There was an activity that we did later on in the trimester where she had us do that, which was really cool. I wish we did it a little bit beforehand, so then we kind of got the prompt for the chat gbt a little bit sooner, but it was still a really cool idea and a great way to practice for the second practical. And then Dr. King, she is really helpful with giving you a template of how to like what to write out where, and she gives you that PDF. Definitely make sure you look over that so you know what to put where, because it's not necessarily hard knowing what to put where, but to know that you made sure you put everything that you needed to put in there. For example, with rehab, any of the rehab stuff that you put in there, you have to say like the start time, the end time, how the patient responded, and like sets and reps, and what actual exercise that you did. And then for the adjustment, you have to say like what you adjusted, um, what the restriction was. Well, I guess that would be what you adjusted, how you adjusted it, who adjusted it. So it's just like different nitty gritty stuff that you need to make sure that you like put in there that she puts on that practice sheet. She also gives you an assignment where you do it yourself and then you grade yourself. Those are really, really helpful. So like, even though they don't count a ton towards your grade, make sure you do it because it really helps with the actual class for documentation. All right, we got 2 more classes. So FSA, or full spine adjusting 3 with Dr. Mackey. If you have been frustrated with FSA, this one has been my favorite FSA so far. It feels less chaotic, there's a different vibe to it, and it's so much more efficient than any of the other FSAs. She will actually set a timer where she's like, okay, I'm only allowed to talk for this amount of time. And she'll like put on like upbeat music. We had Dr. Lopez was in our class, and so he would like be the DJ for the class, and it was a great time. You get to document and do a full evaluation on your patient. You will have days where you dress up as if you're doing clinic attire, and you could ask them like, hey, what is this okay to wear for clinic? And she'll either tell you yes or no. I did it every time, except my shoes were never clinic approved because I've been waiting for so long to have the money to then buy Zero shoes that are the flats, because I was like, there is no way I'm going to be able to wear regular shoes through the whole day of clinic if they are not wide toe box. So they're coming in on Monday, so I'm so excited to actually try them. And I feel like a full-fledged adult now because I have professional shoes, kind of. But that she like won't count off points or anything if you're not in full clinic attire. But it is helpful because then you like get to feel if like these are actual clothes that you can like move around in and adjust in. So I would say definitely do the clinic attire, and then also do the adjustments that you suck at or you're afraid of. I say this every single time, but like for me, I have done side posture so many times. I love doing side posture drops. They're my favorite thing. I love just going, yeah, on the on the side posture drop. It feels smooth. It feels easy for me. I didn't do kicks. Never did kicks. And then because of just the flow of things, I never really made sure that I was practicing like seated CT, or I wasn't really checking occiput or like practicing occiput. And I was like, okay, my goal this try is to practice kicks, seated CT, and occiput. So anytime I was always palpating occiput, I was always palpating CT junction. I just wasn't doing it seated. So if I had the chance to do it seated, I'd do it seated. And then if I had a kick, or like a lumbar listing or a PI listing, or a sacrum adjustment, I would always do a kick first, and then I could always go back and do a drop. But I wanted to get good at kicks. So I wouldn't say I'm amazing at kicks yet, because I spent so much time doing drops, but I am better than what I was before because I did the adjustments that I sucked at. So again, do the adjustments that you suck at, and don't be afraid to suck at them, because you either will continue to suck at them because you're not practicing them, or you will suck at them for a little bit and then you will actually get better at them because you are practicing the things that you suck at. So pick your poison. The other thing I would say is like practice the adjustments or palpations that you learned at MPI. Come to MPI Club and practice. Like, you get so much information in your hands if you go to MPI Club. I do not feel shameless about plugging in my club right now, because the reason why I go to club and I am the president of the club is because I know it is important to get information from your hands. I went to go shadow a chiro recently, literally yesterday, and he couldn't fully confirm that someone had a spondy, because you need like imaging for that, but he's like, all the findings go towards spondy. And I was like, how do you know that? And he was like, feel her, or he has one himself. So he was like, feel my spine. And I was like, whoa. And so like, and the only reason you would know that is because you have information in your hands, and you know what normal feels like, and you know what, and then once abnormal pops up, you're like, whoa, this is different. Something's not wrong, or something's not right. So go to club, practice, and then practice the things that you learn in club, because if you suck at it, you still need to practice it, and ask questions about the adjustments. All of the professors in there, I was like, okay, I'm doing this. What am I doing wrong? Or this is what I'm feeling. Something doesn't feel right. And if there's a professor where you're like, they're just not giving me the answer that I need, go to a different one. Like, stop complaining about the adjustment that you suck at and that like no one's helping you. Because if it's just one person that didn't help you, then go to someone else different. And if they explain it better, not everyone is for everyone. So if they explain it a different way, go to that person that you like every time. Plain and simple. Thank you for listening to my TED Talk about adjustments and MPI. All right, last class, which is my elective. This was my favorite elective so far, hands down. Dr. DMAC's class, Cody DMAC, HEMAC, whatever you want to call it. Favorite class, advanced rehab. If you are not taking this elective, you are missing out. I'm like, like, you need to take this elective. I know I'm a little biased because I like the rehab stuff, but even if you're not into rehab, going into patient management and realizing if there's a section where you're like, I don't know how to like treat a patient that way. A lot of us don't get a ton of information or time with the rehab realm as chiropractors. And it's so important. Like, for me personally, I want to get my patients from being in pain to back to the activities that they enjoy, so they can start living their life and exploring the way that their body moves and finding joy and fulfillment in either, whether that being hiking or biking or swimming or basketball or weightlifting, whatever brings them joy, so they can actually start living a healthy life and not thinking, should I go to that water aerobics class? I don't know. That's gonna like make me have a lot of back pain. I don't want them thinking that. I want to be able to like take them from pain to joy and activity. And this class will help you with that. He puts so much effort into this elective. I feel like with an elective, you either get it's super chill, you don't do anything, but like it's a brain reset and you spend 2 hours just you're there. And for me personally, I don't like those kinds of classes. I would rather get something out of it. But then you also have those classes where you're like, this is an elective, this should be fun. I should be learning something, but I don't want to have to worry about the grade. And there's some electives where it's like, I feel like this is a full on another class that I have to take and I'm stressing out about it. This class is not that way. This elective is the class that is fun and chill. You'll be laughing all the time. You get all the dad jokes, which is great. And then, but you're still learning so much information. I was watching his lecture videos and he has so many research papers in his lecture videos that he fully explains and talks through. And he was even telling us like how many endless hours it took him to like that one research paper that you saw in his PowerPoint. He was like, there was 5 other research papers that he filtered through to make sure like that was the correct research paper he wanted to put in there. So he put a lot of effort into this class, but he also wants to make this class really fun and a welcome environment to learn in, and he realizes that it is an elective and you shouldn't have to worry about your grade in this class. It is on Fridays. It is from 1 to 3, but it's totally worth it. I would actually come in early with some of my friends and we would go to open lab, practice the things we worked the week or we learned the week before, or we just joke around. Or if like I had a friend who's like, I'm dealing with this issue, and I was like, I want to go and do some neurodynamics on you, let's practice. And then I would go over to DMAC and I'd be like, help. And he'd be like, okay, you need to do this. What about this? And it was nice to have that guidance in open lab. And then we would just have class right afterwards. So it was great. It was a great way to spend a Friday. So if you are either a try or going into try 8 or a try 6 going into try 7, highly recommend this elective. If you're scared about the exams or practicals, don't be scared. The practicals are like the PT2 practicals, but way more chill. You will still feel stupid. But they're not the same as PT2. They're the same setup, but the vibe is completely different. And as far as exams, like don't worry about the exams. If you pay attention in class and pay attention to the quizzes, you will be fine. And if you are hesitant on taking this class because of your PT2 experience or like maybe your grade in PT2, I would say sign up. Sign up because it's different vibe, and you'll learn a lot without the like worrying pressure of the grades. The only tip I have for this class is more of a personal tip, is like keep all the videos that he posts, because he posts them on YouTube. It's a YouTube link, and keep them in like a document or a Notion page. That's what I did. So that you can refer back to these videos and be like, okay, how do I do that like median nerve neurodynamics thing? Or how do I do the ulnar nerve neurodynamics thing? He doesn't teach you neurodynamics or DNS or MDT, because you would have to go to a seminar to do that, but he teaches you the principles and like the exercises around it that he's found most beneficial. So if you're like, I don't know if I want to go and do a DNSA or not, take this elective, see if you like it, see if you like the principles, and then you'll know if you should spend your money on a seminar or not. So it is definitely worth it to sign up for this elective. All right. I think I've said enough about this class. If you can't tell, I really enjoyed this class a lot. But that is it for Try 7. Those were all the classes that I took. If you want to listen to the part 2 that will be coming out in 2 weeks about my personal experience in Try 7, things that I learned, seminars I went to, and just like my feelings during, I don't want to say feelings, but like I've been talking to other students who are in upper tries who had the same like internal thought process in Try 7 as I did, and I don't think it's talked about enough. And I feel like it's the only reason why it makes Try 7 hard. That's what I talk about in the next podcast. So definitely listen to that. Or you may also just want to like put this on a repeat, as far as like maybe you're in Try 7 and you're having these thoughts. Maybe this part 2 podcast will be something that could like keep you encouraged through Try 7, Try 8, Try 9, all the things above. So make sure you listen to that part 2 of this podcast. And if you have any questions, please email me at beccababelspodcast@gmail.com or DM me on Instagram at Becca and Wellness. I hope you have a great rest of your day, and I can't wait to babble with you next time. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Becca Babbles Podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, the best thing that you can do is leave a 5-star rating and review on Apple Podcast, Spotify, or any other listening platform of your choosing. If you want to learn more about me, you can do that by following me on Instagram at Becca and Wellness, or by checking out my blog, freebies, offers, and newsletter on my website at beccaandwellness.com. If you want to share the love of the podcast, you can do that by taking a screenshot and sharing it on social media and tagging me and the podcast at Becca and Wellness and using the hashtag Becca Babbles Podcast. I hope you have a great rest of your day, and I can't wait to babble with you next time.